Do you ever wonder what happened to your friends from high school? I mean, you were so close. You laughed together, you cried together, you shared some of the best years of your lives together. And yet, somehow through life, you just lost touch. Now it's time to relive those moments once again. Introducing the podcast that takes you back in time to the place where it all began. This is Class Reunion. We're bringing you all the gossip, secrets, and scandals from your high school days that you won't want to miss. Join us as we catch up with old classmates and dive into the wildest stories from our high school days. From those legendary parties to the infamous cliques, we're spilling all the tea on who's who and what really went down. So grab a seat, turn your volume up, and get ready for a trip down memory lane. Class Reunion, the podcast that reunites us all. Welcome back to another episode of Class Reunion as we continue our conversation with JC Whitelaw. And this could be another 2 hours, we don't know. But thank you for listening to the first part. And as you can see, he's somebody so easy to talk to that time goes by quickly. So I appreciate you, JC, in doing the background of your musical career, because that was very, very cool, worth discussion. But what was really neat is when we originally connected about our high school years, that whole life that you lived really is its own episode. That's why we're doing this a two-part, because just you talking about how your parents migrated to Canada, we're going to start there. That was unusual for people in our neighborhood. You know, we were all just very suburbanites, I guess, if you have that term. So to even know that your parents came over from Scotland, or their parents, it just wasn't a common theme back then. So just that whole upbringing that you had was different, which made you feel different. And then, you know, the whole their marriage and how you ended up kind of raising yourself is so fascinating that I want to take some time to dedicate it as this part of the episode because it's really unique. So we talked about the Scottish heritage. In Scotland, yes, everybody goes to it now and they think it's so cool and it is beautiful. But back then, it didn't have the opportunity for your family. And so go through that.
Right. I mean, that is like the quintessential blue collar town, the whole country like that. Except for some really smart guys that knew how to market it in a different way and ended up, because there's a lot of innovation that came out of Scotland, a massive amount of innovation, arguably is responsible for the modern world. So do a little history.
Don't tell the Greeks that, because it started with Windex, as we all know.
I'm not talking about that part.
Yeah.
I'm talking the Industrial Revolution.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, parents moved from Scotland to Canada. My dad starts working for a paint company, gets into the advertising business. He was a very charming and cool guy, my old man. He was awesome.
Chip off the old block. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about that. It's big shoes to fill. He was bigger than life and charming and cool and fun and Scottish. And you can't not talk to somebody with a Scottish accent. And I should fake it. I should just speak like a Glaswegian for the rest of my life, and it'll probably get me further than any part of my career has ever taken me.
Can't say I don't like it. Yeah.
It's a very lyrical accent.
Yes.
Oh, so he ends up getting a gig with art supplier, and another one of his talents was he was a lettering guy. He loved creating characters. Type
like fonts, different
font. Yeah, he loved doing that. That was like he loved that. He ends up going to a typesetting place that does a bunch of art supply for a bunch of companies in Detroit, and he ends up working his way through it. They realize Billy's got a lot of talent. Billy, my dad is William, whatever. Billy has got a lot of talent in this department, and starts sketching out ideas that then can communicate to a client. The boss of that particular agency at the time sends him on a couple of calls for business, and he ends up hitting it pretty big in that world.
Really big,
cool, and he knows how to communicate an idea.
Yeah,
one of his first clients ends up being Motown Records, and this is 1964, maybe.
So cool.
So that they had an art department in house that kind of ran, but basically they brought in all their artists. They didn't create anything in house. They went out, found talent, brought it in. Not unlike the record business, which is you have a hit song, you want to find a singer, you bring in that singer, you bring in that band, you put it together, and boom, there you go. So it was a matter of that. And Barry Gordy, in his good graces, really dug my old man and put him in touch with the guy who was head of their art, who actually gets credit for all of that in the sense that they went out and found the artist, but they didn't create anything. So that's what my old man told me. So that Motown M, the very steely looking one, that's my father's hand. He did that. And the Tamala Records label, that's actually his handwriting script. That's what he...
I mean, that is so incredible and such a part of history.
It is. It's huge. And to look back and think, oh man, it's a shame you didn't cut a deal. And he didn't care. He was like, this was work for hire. He just created it. He made it. He put it out. He got paid. He moved on. That was it. No legacy. My old man was very cool with wanting to help people. And I think that's where I get my production skills from, was to meet talented people and then realize like this talented person should be with that talented person, or they should collaborate, or it should be that kind of thing. And I learned all of that from my dad, just in a different medium, right? I still practice all the same things that he did, and I learned that from him. So then he gets to be a pretty big cheese in the art world in sales in Detroit. So all these other agencies started going after my dad, saying, let's get him to sell, and that's what happened. So he came up right in that era of the Mad Men show, which I never really watched until it was, I think it was like into its last season before I even started watching it.
Same.
But,
I mean, I knew of it, but
I went back and then got totally hooked. And why? Because talk about nostalgia. I mean, I knew that life through my dad, and that was just normal. Like it was just normal. And now, obviously, living my little abnormal life, but have a perspective, it's like that was so not normal for my classmates, or they didn't have dads that were, in hustling and drinking at 10 o'clock in the morning, hustling their new idea. But that was the artist mentality. They were just doing their thing. That was part of their life.
Well, yes and no. And Mad Men's going to play a really big part in the ending of the story. So stay with us on this, because the parallels are incredible. My dad had martini lunches because we called him working with numbers. And so he'd come home and my mom would say, "Did you work with numbers today, Tom?" Because what your dad discovered was that the auto industry was so heavy and reliant and competitive in this advertising world that he fell right into it and excelled in it. But even as a manufacturer's rep, like my dad, or anybody in automotive sales or anything, they were all at the strip clubs having martinis. So even though my dad wasn't creative, he participated. You know what I'm saying? It just got to another level in the ad world because they had bigger budgets. But shoot, that whole automotive world back in the 60s and the 70s, 80s, even, they drank.
And that trickled down even to the line workers who were like hammered by the afternoon.
Yes.
Right? And
yes. That's the only thing I wanted to say is like everybody that was the glory days of advertising in Motor City. It was on fire.
Oh, absolutely. And then, and the opportunities came because my dad did a bunch of work for Chrysler, a bunch of work for Procter and Gamble. He was a main supplier for one of the main ad agencies, which had massive advertising budget. He met a guy, Art Greenwald, who was his mentor, and he was my dad, and they got along very well. And Art knew what my dad was capable of, and my dad knew what Art was capable of, and they partnered.
And this was like everybody was in. There was BBDO. There was.
He did. My dad worked for every ad agency. That ever existed. I think that was of note.
Yeah. So it was very cool for your father, but it put some strain.
Oh, absolutely. Like in the
marriage.
Yeah, absolutely, it did. But it's not like they didn't know what they were all doing. My mom was a creative artist in a a builder
Yeah.
in designer
Yeah.
for. She did a bunch of beautiful buildings around and homes around Birmingham that are still there, and they haven't changed anything. You know what I mean? They haven't. She was a real visionary, real artist in her own right. Absolutely, no question. Maybe even more talented than my old man when it came to actual art.
What a marriage, really, though. Jeez.
Yeah, but they were all off. They had visions. They had a picture, or they had a picture of what they wanted to do. But yeah, of course, it took a toll on their relationship. Though I think at the end of the day, they were best friends because they knew each other since they were 4 years old. Right. So they were, and I can relate to that because I have a relationship like that with my best friend, who was my partner in life for 12 years before we decided that wasn't where it was at anymore. That's a whole other story. Yeah, we immigrated into they had split or were separated, and that's when I grew up in North Ontario, Canada. My dad was doing big things in Detroit. Things started getting better. He's like, it's time to move here with me and the kids, and we'll continue on. And my mom was clearly okay with that, so they kind of got back together. Not that they were ever apart, because that was just how they operated. So I know that sounds weird, but that was just our normal, So we moved to the States 76, 77-ish.
Okay.
Got my green card and all that. Another point, I just had to renew a green card.
But I mean, did we even know about green cards back then? That's what I'm saying is so unique.
Oh, yeah,
like here you are in Birmingham Groves, and we just think everybody's the same. And it's like, no, your life story is so different.
No, I'm Canadian.
Yeah.
and still am, and didn't ever become an American citizen.
Oh, really? I just learned that. Okay.
Yeah. My kids are the first American Whitelaws in my family.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Never gave it up. And they've opened it up now where Canada, they can allow you to have dual citizenship. But I just never went through the process of, though I know and I love American history, I just never committed to being an American.
Yeah.
I don't know why. Because I'm Canadian.
I like it.
I like my maple leaf.
Yes. Eh?
Yeah. So nonetheless, and my kids have the opportunity to have their citizenship dual. They can be American and Canadian based on my birthright. So that's allowed. But we'll see where they go with that. Parents moved back, or my mother and my sister and I moved back and immigrate to the United States. We live with my dad, but now I see him a lot more, but barely, because he's still out killing it out there.
Right.
And he then decides that he's going to open up his own shop, which is probably late 70s, around the time that we moved into the U.S. And then he got really successful. I mean, he was already successful at that point, but really successful. But I never saw him. Never saw him.
Same country, but still distance. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, never saw him. They were always busy. We always had good times hanging out. But I always said to my mom, and this was later on in life, I think we were in our late 20s by this point, it was just normal for us to arrive, like at a wedding, four of us, my sister would arrive, I'd arrive, my mom would arrive, my dad would arrive in 4 different cars. And that was just normal.
The Whitelaw caravan. Yeah.
That was, because everybody had something going on.
Yeah.
And it was just what it was. So, though it always made me yearn, like I had friends in high school that had real family units that were traditional. And I always yearned for that. And I was like, I want that one day. I want to, because I always thought that was really special.
But how many people knew that about you at school? We don't ask, are you from a traditional tribe? We just didn't ask it. I never knew the story about you till you told me. Like, it's just interesting what we're all processing as kids. And anyway, not that it was bad or
So, I mean, so I suppose having a bit more of an open mind kind of comes from that.
Yes, definitely.
Background. Because I was always meeting new people. I was always running into someone. And I always had to kind of fend for myself in the sense of, I wasn't one of those kids that shied off behind mom's leg when somebody came along. I was like, hi,
front and center. Right.
how you doing? How you
Right.
doing? You know,
Right.
who are you? What are you about? You know what I mean? It was always one of those things. Precocious, I think is the word, isn't it? I don't know. So through that period, and then the times were getting crazy. Parents were never around. My mom had the original, we finally landed in Bingham Farms, which is right up.
Yes.
Yeah, so we landed in
This
Bingham
is
Farms.
cool. So
And, Bingham Farms originally, back in the 1800s, was a farm. That's the name, right? Right exactly halfway between, if you know the area, Telegraph and Losser, off of 13 Mile. That's where Bingham Farms is. And the original farmhouse is still there. It's right off of 13 Mile, halfway down. Right behind that farmhouse was a carriage barn for the farms there. And it had been renovated in the 60s in the typical like Ponderosa motif with wagon wheels and shit hanging from the seat. Like it was hilarious.
Or Cracker Barrel. Yeah.
Yeah, with Cracker Barrel, right? And my mom had found this place and she saw the vision of it and literally went inside the place and tore it down to its studs, which were from the 1800s, mid 1800s. So everything's like hand hewn, like all the logs are cut and there's all these little chop marks from them sliding off all the bark and taking the wood down. I mean, it's hand lumber, right? Yeah. Handmade lumber. And she loved that. And she went and found a barn that was built in the same era, tore it down, brought it down to Bingham Farms and attached it. So there was the original carriage barn. And then she brought this new barn down and put it and stuck them together because that's how Grace thought.
And I mean, I know people from school probably knew that's where you lived, but to me, that whole Bingham Farms area was all about field trips.
Right.
Like I just remember going in the fact
it was a nature center right in our backyard.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so the fact that you lived right there is just like so cool because it was so out of the norm. Speaking of norms again, of the suburb, the neighborhood, like Cranbrook Village or Pembroke or wherever. I mean, it's very cool, but I wonder, was it also isolating to not be in a trick-or-treat neighborhood kind of thing?
There were definitely moments in which I wanted to like experience that, but then I had to have a friend who did live in a neighborhood like that. Mm-hmm. And then I'd go have that experience. Yes, there were wants and yearnings for those kind of connections, though my parents weren't really neighborly in the sense of wanted to be all friendly with the neighbors. They just weren't that kind of people. Yeah. And I mean, where we grew up in North Ontario, my nearest neighbor was a half a mile away. Yeah. Right. So it was isolation to some degree was a norm. Yeah.
They would have probably been less uncomfortable in the fabricated houses that all looked the same in a neighborhood.
They just were onto their own tracks. And they weren't, I don't want to say they weren't neighborly.
No. It just suited their personality much more.
Because it did. And for their world. And we definitely pissed off some neighbors.
In what way? Because of the style or the?
I think, there was one time in which my dad decided that he was going to let everything, it's a barn. He's going to let everything overgrow. Oh. For a bit to make it look even more rustic. Right. And the neighbors were like, you can't do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Unless it's full of sunflowers, it looks like weeds.
Yeah, they were gorgeous wildflowers. Oh. It was a gorgeous era for that house, but the neighbors were definitely pissed. And I'll never forget it. And I would rehearse there with my first rock and roll bands from high school, right? Mm-hmm. And we'd be playing loud as hell and doing our thing. And they'd call the cops.
You weren't exactly having a soundproof, environment. Piece of styrofoam up there or whatever.
There was nothing like that. Yeah. So I ended up building the studio in that house I had it for many, many years. Made my first album in that house. And actually my sister still lives there. My sister bought it from my dad and moved in there and has lived there since my dad moved out.
Very cool.
So, great times, great history. being exposed to all those kind of arty and wonderful things. It was a fabulous thing, but I was kind of on my own.
You were very on your own, because
Yeah.
that's the other part that I was like, my jaw dropped, because it would never fly today.
Yeah. Though at the same token is I had, I did, even though I was, I got into a little bit of trouble, I was never crazy. I was always very conscious of who was invited over, or, if they were going to be swinging off the chandeliers, then that wasn't going to happen, because I didn't want to piss my parents off, right?
Yeah.
I was held to a responsibility that I needed to take care of. And though there were some times it probably went over the line, nobody got hurt.
Well, you could still live with your parents, get in trouble. I mean, come on. I had parties all the time. But at what age did you live there on your own?
I would say from probably the age of 15 till 19, 20.
And you are going to school every day.
Yeah, I made it to school. There, prior to that, there was a time in which things got kind of wonky with my mom, who was, at the time, mental illness is a real pain in the ass.
Yes.
And it's a bitch. And if you have to deal with that in your family world, that's definitely one of the things you don't talk about to your classmates. So during the construction of the barn, which is where I lived at that time, my mother had her first suicide attempt. And it was kept in the dark. And I didn't really know. And I think I was probably about 13 probably about 13 at the time. And no one told me, but I knew that something was weird with mom. Something happened to mom. And
I don't even think the word mental illness was in our vocabulary.
No, it just
was like,
wasn't.
you're either normal or crazy. That's really
right. And so that's what, it would label out, and nobody talked about it. Nobody dealt with it. I was really fortunate enough to have, when I first moved to the States, my friend Brooke Dickey, I'll never forget it, introduced me to and we were living in condos back in Royal Oak. That was our first home in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And his neighbor was a lawyer and had a wife, Larry and Linda Luke, who had a new little boy, Matthew. And Larry was, God, he must have been in his late 20s at the time, maybe. Yeah, late 20s. And loved kids in a genuine family build community kind of way. And I became, and my family became dear friends of the Lukes, who ended up, when this was going on with my mom, ended up taking me in because things were so crazy.
Oh, that I didn't know.
In my neck of the woods.
Yeah.
At 12, 13. It's just coming to me. I remembered it, but it was one of those things that was 100 years ago. They took me in, and I lived with them for like 2 years, from probably about 13 to 15. They took care of me because my dad was busy doing his thing, and my mom was in the loony bin.
Yeah.
Her first round with the loony bin.
Was your sister there too?
Oh, there were 4 rounds of loony bin with my mom.
Oh, bless her heart.
Yeah. And looking back on it now, like it's very emotional.
Mm-hmm.
I've kind of compartmentalized that as a survival tactic, as we all do, right? To think about it or even talk about it now is always uncomfortable. But it's the reality of what it was. And she had her ups, she had her downs. Now, we would call that bipolar this day and age, but back in the day, they called it manic depression.
And no real pharmaceuticals at the time to really
No. As a matter of fact, at least on their first round of how to try to deal with that, they nearly killed her with the medication that they put her on. And I'm like, and so when your mom kind of decides that she wants to, because of her own demons, but what that does to us and how that scars us as people, it's just one of those things. But that was always a real hard point for me to deal with as an adult, with feeling not good enough. That was always still a demon, right? So interesting looking back at the era and the ways that, and then the Lukes were my saving grace. They were angels in my life. And actually, we stayed friends for
I was just
until
going to ask that if
that probably really set me up to not make massive errors. I mean, I've made my mistakes in life, but I could understand how somebody who was maybe a little emotionally damaged, which I definitely was with that whole era of my life.
yes,
It could have gone
south.
way worse. There's no question. And they saved me. They saved me from that. There's no question of that. I owe them tons. I owe them a balance that they taught me, that I was like, okay, this is how it's supposed to be. This is normal, not necessarily. I mean, don't get me wrong. I loved my family's world and the uniqueness of that to some degree, but it wasn't, maybe not the healthiest environments with those kind of issues going on. And in this day and age, I think we've progressed in the sense of recognizing and being able to talk about emotional issues.
It was
with
not
our fellow
talked about.
friends, people, whatever. I think we're progressing there. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
I think we've got a long way to go.
But it's true. Well, two things. I think that family gave you a little bit of what you were craving, which was that nuclear environment. So you did get a little of that. Yet
Sure.
you also could appreciate and keep the creativity alive of that more well-rounded lifestyle than a lot of us had. And I appreciate you taking an extra leap in sharing that, because it's a cool story. And we just don't share. This is the thing. Okay. Going to the philosophy behind my personal journey, as you call it, but it's all of ours, because our stories are going to die. And unless we tell them, even if it's just a little bit, it doesn't mean it has to be a book or a movie or anything. But there's so much fascination around JC Whitelaw or Leanne Lauterbach Pepper, or like where we all came from, that
Sure.
I don't talk to my kids about, or my son about this. Maybe you do a little bit to your kids, but these stories are never going to be told because we're so living in the present. And
Right.
and that's why I just think it's kind of nice to go back and just reflect and verbalize it.
Yeah. And you need to, because you can't walk through life having demons like that or skeletons like that in your closet and function. I mean,
Right.
I still have strong difficulties with that kind of stuff, though I'm aware of it. I've had a lot of therapy, mostly on my own, being able to process my feelings. And I do that through my music, which has been my saving grace. And ultimately, that's what I do it for. I don't do it for any other reason other than being able to, I have a channel in which I can exercise those demons, because once I do it, you got to talk about,
You
the
do.
other stuff. It's terrible, but you got to talk about it, or you ain't going to grow, and you're not going to, you sure as hell are not going to be as healthy as you could be but it's hard to trust. It's hard to put it out there. It's hard to believe, because people can't handle it. People can't handle those truths.
Right.
We'll fast forward. We're into hour number 4. You can't handle truths. I going back to, another horror story down the road. So 2014 of September, I'm relatively newly divorced, which was difficult, but it was a decision I had to make based on, again, another mental health issue, in my opinion. Moved in with my dad, who had now moved into a condominium at Inkster and 15 complex.
This is a very good segue. Yeah.
And he was downsizing. He was getting older, and I was going through my changes, but I was getting my act together because I was getting my act together with my kids and all that stuff, who were with me still half the time and all that stuff. The typical.
Which you have 2 beautiful
thing
daughters and a son, and a handsome son.
I do. They're amazing, and they are so much cooler than me and so much smarter than me. Thank God. Their mother and I got that part right, I think.
Yeah. Yes.
So proud of them and where they're headed. And I've been totally open, going back to the whole sharing thing, I have been completely open about the stories of my family, my past.
Oh,
so
that's great,
it's them
JC.
from day one. Like it
Yeah.
was like, yeah, this is what's going on. I never, I mean, I protect them obviously, but I don't hide the truth from them. I never have. It's been,
That's beautiful. And that probably is therapy driven. That's nice.
Some things I kept in the dark as this story unfolds, and I'll tell you why that is in a minute, but ultimately it's all on the table.
Can we just, I want to close this piece out because we went really fast over it. You talked about living with a family when you're 13, but you in high school were on your own, literally. You lived in that house by yourself.
Yep, for the most part. Yeah.
That's incredible to go to school, have a life, love music. Well, all this shitstorm is happening. That's what I'm saying. You went in, roamed the halls and were friendly with people. And who would know this full story is all I'm trying to say. I just want to close that out of like, I find it fascinating. Everybody knows Bingham Farms. Everyone's probably seen that farmhouse. But did everyone know that JC Whitelaw was living in there, going to school on a bus by himself every day? Incredible. Let me just quickly say this too before you move on. You did not graduate at Groves.
No, no.
So finish that and then go to your dad's.
I ended up getting into some trouble, but this is because what ended up happening was my mom came back from her stint away, her most recent stint away, and because she had moved to California. And then she decided she was going to come back home and be the parent that she wasn't for the beginning of my teenage years. Mm-hmm. She decided that she was going to just show up and tell me what to do now after I've been solo and away from her.
Which is a lot to unpack right there.
Which is 6 years. And it was like,
yeah,
no, you don't get to come in. No,
yeah.
no. I mean, that's a whole other episode, right?
Yes.
I get busted with a joint. I get busted with a joint. She finds a joint in my sock drawer because she went searching. And I wasn't a heavy druggie, but I was like partying just like everybody else was in high school at that particular age. Maybe a little more than the other, but I didn't drink then. Every now and then I'd smoke some pot. That was my thing. Play guitar and smoke some pot. Right. That's what I did. I'm leaving this in. I get fucking crucified for it, literally. Mm-hmm. I get sent away to a treatment center in Tucson, Arizona, for getting busted with pot. And this is no just like, Maple Grove, like fancy dancing.
Wasn't the Malibu, right?
No. This is not,
treating you like a hardcore drug.
Because they're absolutely convinced I'm a heroin. I am an absolute, stealing and robbing, and I'm a criminal. No, but I went to a treatment center that had all of that. So that was a hell of an experience. And I was there for almost a year.
And why I think that's so important to share as well is the conflict you and your mom had to have from that moment on was tremendous.
There was 10 years of conflict even prior to that, based on the other issues.
And it's your mom,
She comes back like going, oh, I'm not having anything to do with this, and ends up, she has all this rage about her husband. Now she has all this rage about why her life isn't where it's at. Yeah. And who was the first target that she decided, well, I'm not putting up with this, and you're gone. And then I get sent. So this place is like, if you guys ever Google this shit, I'm sure there'll be a Netflix movie about it because I'm probably going to produce it. But there was this system in Southern California with a bunch of loonies it was coming from a good place in the sense of they wanted to help people who were messed up. These were all you should do it. Paris Hilton did it. Paris Hilton. The 60s.
Yeah. She was at some crazy school. Yeah.
Well, this place was called Synanon. And the owner of
what's it called?
The Synanon. If you Google that, and the founder of Synanon ended up not being liked by certain parts of the community, and they were going after him, their critics, by like putting rattlesnakes in their mailboxes and shit. Synanon crashes and burns, and the survivors of Synanon fly into southern Tucson and start another program. And but their whole basis is basically tear down your personality, rebuild you so you're a functioning person in society, which is great for somebody who's been a blown out criminal junkie for 20 years. Not so much for a fucking 17-year-old, 18-year-old who got busted with some pot. So that was a real interesting experience. I got a little depersonalized. I got rescued out of there after about 8 months. Came back home, kind of readjusted to what it was like living in the real world. And my senior year, I came back, went to a school, kind of like a little charter school for about 4 months before I was done with it.
Yeah,
I think that's how that shook out. And met my first one of my musical partners about a year after that, and Billy Brandt, who's still one of my dearest friends and musical partners in life. Met Billy, and then we started Ashcan and rock and roll, you know.
So there's a lot in between that and your marriage, but let's go to your dad, because it's a full circle Mad Men moment, which is what we were talking about. And when you shared with me that piece, I was like, this is just a nutty world.
Yeah. Fast forward 20 years, 15, 20 years. Dad's living in a condo. He actually asked me to come and move in with him because he's getting a little older. Yeah. And it's a good fit, because then I can do stuff for him and, you know, be closer to him. When I hit about 20, slight backstory, hitting about 25 years old, my dad and I started seeing him almost every day. So he'd been kind of gone throughout my life till about 25 years old. And then he and I were hanging out all the time. So it was like catch up for lost time. And then we really liked each other's company, which was kind of nice, because I it was fun because he took that kind of interest in me and mine in him. And we got along, everything. We were really tight. My dad and I were really tight, blah, blah, blah. So I move in with my dad to figure out what I'm going to do before, earn some money, get my act together and get a new place and all that fun stuff. But this is just a cushion between having to do that and take that all on. I'm there about a year, maybe close to 2. And September 2014, my dad is murdered by a contractor who was working in the condos. Turns out the management company of the condos hired a violent felon who then was coming in to steal and rob from the condo people, for lack of better terms. September 4th, 2014, it's a Thursday night. I come with my kids into his house because we're coming to cook dinner for him, as we do every Thursday. And I walk in the house and all I can smell is heavy gas, like raw gas. I get the kids out of the landing area from the house because it's bad, and get them in the car, move the car away from the house. I run back into the house, run up the stairs. I come upstairs and I find my dad, who's clearly been murdered. The curtains are drawn. It's a horror scene, and there's candles lit everywhere. And why place didn't explode still to this day. I mean, we know why it didn't, but it was right at that flashpoint. Call 911, get the windows open, check the rest of the house, get the candles out. That was the first maneuver. And I go into autopilot from 2014 to about 2024. Really difficult time dealing with that. That was a horror story that I don't wish on anybody. You never think that kind of stuff happens. And I've never known anybody that was murdered. I've seen it on TV. Never knew anybody that actually happened to. I do now. I know, unfortunately, I know a lot of people that's actually happened to. And, though you don't talk about that stuff and because it freaks people the fuck out. Like I would talk about this and people are very interested. They love to talk about the drama of, ooh, like it's got a sick appeal, but we all watch murder dramas and everything and we love that shit, right? When it's actually happening to you,
the
it's
psychological aspect.
It's a little bit of a different picture.
And everything you went through thereafter, which it's your choice to decide, but it wasn't easy.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. I mean, statistically, 80% of homicide is committed by a family member.
Mm-hmm.
Never knew that stat, but that's actually true. 20% are these random run-ins, but 80% are people. You're getting murdered. You get 80% of chance the person that's murdering you. For the first 3 days of them looking, they were looking real hard at me, which I couldn't believe because I was dealing with what I had to deal with the loss of my dad, what way I lost him and in which the way I found him. It was like the Manson murders. It was not, it was very
gruesome.
Gruesome. Thank you. That's the word. Angry and heinous and terrible. And details are ugly. To be accused of or to be thought of as the person who did that was a real scary time. Mm-hmm. Really, really scary time. This is, at the end of the day, a story of hope and healing. Mm-hmm. The guy's caught. They caught him. Had to go through a trial. Had to deal with all of that, which are so many levels you don't even have an idea of unless you're experiencing it. And that's all I can say about that. I didn't get even to grieve it because I was in such shock over the act. I didn't start dealing with the grief until probably 3, 4 years after. And it still comes in bits. I'm a lot healthier now because I've sought help in dealing with it. But I ended up getting diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was something that, soldiers had in the heat of battle and, losing their buddy or seeing the horror of war and stuff. But guess what? same thing. Mm-hmm. Didn't know that. And it changed me. It did. Having that experience changed me, made me react differently, made me a lot more suspicious of people in general. I used to walk
Which
around.
Is not your nature. So it's counterintuitive to who you are as an individual.
It is. And then, but then I, I've got this perspective, and this is before I got some help over it, was, oh, well, that's a potential murderer. Mm-hmm. He's looking at me funny. Is he going to try to hurt me? Is he going to try to hurt my family? Mm-hmm. But I was walking around in terror, absolute terror. Really, that was a really difficult time. And then I learned all about it. Then I met another angel and godsend in my life. His name's Ken Meisel, who taught me the practice of EMDR, which is basically a rewiring of your fight-flight mechanisms. And really got me to a point where I can address it when it's coming. I see it when it's coming. If there's an issue, it's handled. I'm normal in that way. I'm just rerouted, for lack of better terms. But
and it's something you can do anywhere at any time. We talked about it a little bit. It's that tapping technique where you just need to calm yourself down, and I don't know where you all hit, but it's the repetitive motion of just re-regulating yourself.
It's basically just teaching your brain how to fire left, right, and reroute the normal direct pathways that are already. Is the way I explain it to people is we all have microchips. And if you remember the Boomtown Rats song, I Don't Like Mondays.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lyric that talks about a tragedy that happened in Southern California. Was the girl went a little cuckoo and went out and shot up some classmates, probably like the first school shooting we ever heard about. And this is long before Columbine.
Mm-hmm.
The lyric in the song is the silicon chip inside her head gets switched to overload, which is an exact, perfect, made sense to me because that's exactly what happened to me. My fight or flight microchip in my head that said, don't react this way, react this way, got fried. And it just goes into direct terror or fear. So you fight or flight, and I'm a fighter. That's just the kind of person.
I've been there.
I've never been.
Your therapy, though, is very successful. I just want to give a shout out to that because it is extremely helpful for anyone.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You don't just have to have post-traumatic stress disorder to reroute the way your thinking pathways work. And this woman, I think in Boston, it actually came up with this concept. And
I forget what the acronym stands for.
I'll look it up for you. And I've said it 1,000 times, and right now I'm just completely lost in it. But the guy I went to see learned from the person who came up with the concept of how that was. Like he was a student.
I do want to put it up as part of this.
He saved my bacon. So thank you, Ken, once again.
So going back to the movie and the time, the little bit of lovely moment that you had, right? Yeah, so you're planning this.
It was literally a week before he got killed. And
you're planning this funeral for a man that's
beloved. It was a Sunday afternoon, not unlike this right now. And my dad's sitting watching. He was Scotsman, and he loved his football. Soccer. Sorry. In this country, it's soccer. After he finishes watching his soccer matches, he's flicking around on the television set and comes across a rerun of Mad Men. Hey, Dad, you should check this out. And he goes, oh, is this show about all the advertising guys? And I said, yeah, you should check it out. And he goes, I don't need to check it out. I lived it. I said, Dad, give it a shot because this is somebody's interpretation of that era. You should check it out just for 5 minutes. Watch it for 5 minutes. So we do. And we watch, and it's the episode of when they got the Jaguar account. Yeah. And this hits kind of close to home, and I'll tell you why. So he watches it for about 5 minutes, and I go to grab the remote, and he goes, no. Don't change it. I want to watch this. And he watches the whole episode, and he's just sitting there like staring at the television. And I'm watching him going like, probably ringing a few bells for you because I do know this story. And in the story in Mad Men ends up the guy with the account is overwhelmed with all the drama and trauma going on with the Jaguar account that he kills himself. And the episode ends, and my dad turns to me and says, who's writing this? And I'm like, well, it's right in the credits. He goes, no. I need to know because I know somebody's talking. So it goes back to that old thing where, you didn't talk about your horror stories. You don't share that stuff. You know what I mean? Like that's the era that they had all come from.
It was all in the vault.
Now, my dad's partner in business was Art Greenwald. Who had the Jaguar account, who killed himself, and it ruined my dad. I mean, he was everything to my old man, and that's actually what made him start. Why my dad started his own boutique company. Out of the ashes of that story, he was shocked that someone had told the story because nobody talked about it, right? So he was like, no, I want to see more of this because I want to know who's actually his words are, I want to know who's clyping. And that's a Scottish term for, I want to know who's talking out of school. And,
but it was such a popular show and yet it's rooted in Detroit's advertising stories.
Yep. And definitely.
And nobody really knew that York, or, sure. Not the whole thing, but a lot of it. The
majority of these ad agencies, their big clients, it was Motor City. No question.
No question. But I do love that you had the moment of time with him to watch that.
Yep.
And then I just was shocked because I said to you, because his funeral was large, obviously. A lot of people attended from Detroit. And how incredible of a full Mad Men moment that Art was left this world so tragically. And then your father, who was another art, right, at that level of mastery of advertising, ends up dying so tragically. It was just a weird
It's a shame.
connection.
It's a shame because ultimately my dad, later in his career, actually throughout his whole career, he was always interested in trying to help somebody out or connect it
Yeah.
because it was good for him if he had better, a stable of artists, for
Yeah.
lack of better terms. And he was always very generous and helpful to other artists that he connected to.
Yeah.
Here was one that was just his thing. If he could help you out, he would. And that's what ended up happening with this fucking murderer, is that he was like, oh, he's hard on his luck, but he's trying to make a difference, and I'm gonna let him. And when I first met the guy, because I did meet him, I told my dad, I'm like, get rid of this guy. He's giving me the heebie-jeebies. I got a bad
you
feeling.
met him. Ugh.
And please get rid of him. I'm sorry. I don't want to be unsupportive, but this is something's off. And my dad cursed me out. He said, "Don't you tell me. I know when people are trying to do what they're trying to do." But about 2 weeks later, he ended up having to get rid of him because he was incompetent. And he gave him a shot and got rid of him. And 2 weeks later, he came back and murdered him. And he was trying to help him. And and this guy did what he did. And then tried to kill all of us. I mean, that was,
right, with the gas.
That
and
was
the
insane.
candles. Yeah.
The grace of God. It was unbelievable that didn't happen. I mean, we were really lucky. Unbelievable.
Because you were there.
The guy goes away forever,
that's any consolation.
and we deal with it, and we move on, and we live and learn from our experiences, and what doesn't kill us makes us stronger.
I never would have known you to this degree and loved you sharing your full story, not just, from the little bit. That's what I love about this. And you've been super open and gracious with your heart, and I appreciate it very, very much. And I can't thank you enough. It's going to be a great series, and I'm looking forward to everybody listening to more about who made up JC Whitelaw.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Obviously, I could talk for a long time about all this stuff. I suppose, looking at it from an outside perspective, yeah, there is some, drama and there's always interest in drama. I don't mind sharing it. At the end of the day, I've made it. I made it through that. If I get through the next thing and it still works out that way, then great. At the same token, it's the cards I was dealt, and it's okay. It's all right. It's part of the journey. It's part of. We all have a story. We all have a story.
Yes.
And I'm just sharing my story. If there's anything I can walk away with, is talk about your stuff. If you need to talk about something, talk about it, because keeping it in the back burner or compartmentalized inside of you will not benefit you as a growing human being. You need to let it fly. And that's the only way you can find healing, at least in my journey.
Yes, and we're on that second half. And if you haven't said it, like somebody said, well, this podcast has become your therapy. Probably because my voice was silent for so long that there's liberation. And so, like you said, I mean, the more people that come on and share, I want them to feel like I've put a little bit off my shoulders and let that go.
No, it's a healthy thing, and I'm really happy for you, and I'm honored that you had me here. Thank you for letting me share.
And JC, I did it without knowing all of this. My interest was in you, and what makes you was what you shared, but my interest was just solely in you. And then you've added all these layers, and I just appreciate you sharing them.
It's a pleasure. I hope your listeners aren't completely mortified.
No,
Probably not.
this will be a very cool episode, and I just appreciate it. And you and I are going to continue conversation. So
Absolutely.
that's the best part. Selfishly, like the friendships I've made everlasting after the podcast, I wouldn't have done that. Like, and Neil was on, and I just love reconnecting and checking on people afterwards. That's just been so fun. I value that. So I value our newfound friendship, and would love to connect with you when I'm in Detroit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we can talk for another 3 hours then. Really, kudos to you for having the courage to do this and take it on and reach out and go through your process of your growth, because clearly that's where it's going for you, is being able to revisit that and in a really healthy way, I think. And just kudos to you. Proud of you. That's right on to you.
Thank you, my friend.
And thanks for having me.
Yes.
And thank you so much.
We'll put all your music and everything. God, we've got a whole list of links we're going to have on your podcast. But thank you, my friend. I adore you. All right, friends. That's it for this episode of Class Reunion Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. And if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the show, write us a review, and share this podcast with a friend. Until next time.